The ATV's engine shrieked like a chainsaw through the morning stillness, tearing down the gravel road. Rocks flew toward my truck, and one of my sanctuary volunteers dove into the bushes just in time. I ran outside, coffee sloshing over my boots, only to see Hero Karen. Yes, that Karen from the HOA barreling down my private road like she was leading a Mad Max parade. And she brought back up. 3 more ATVs followed, engines howling, riders laughing as they churned up gravel and entitlement. Behind them, my gate stood wide open, a chain snapped, the lock dangling like a dead snake. That was the moment I knew my quiet wildlife sanctuary wasn't under attack by poachers or predators. It was under siege by something worse. A suburban dictator with a god complex and a fake badge. I looked from the broken gate to the muddy stretch of path where we just relocated an injured croc. My jaw clenched. She had no idea what line she'd just crossed, but she was about to find out exactly what lives on the other side of it. My name's Riley. After 10 years working military logistics and wildlife conservation abroad, I came home and bought a patch of land just outside the gated HOA community. It was supposed to be a place for peace, crocodile research, and the occasional backyard barbecue. The HOA had its drama bubble. I had my own road, literally, a gravel access path I personally maintained. Legally deeded. Private. No one used it, no one cared, until Karen moved in. Not her real name, of course, but let's be honest, it fits better than her designer sunglasses ever did. She was the new president of the HOA and treated the title like she'd just been crowned queen of a crumbling kingdom. Day 1, she knocked a knot on the front gate, mind you, but the back and introduced herself by demanding a key. Authorized personnel need to monitor communal boundaries, she said. I politely handed her a copy of the deed and said number. She blinked at it like I'd handed her a cocktail napkin with crayon scribbles, then muttered something about legal review. That was the beginning. At first, it was petty, snide remarks from the fence line. Still hoarding crocodiles, are we? Then came the fake citations, taped to my mailbox. Noise violations for frog sounds, illegal foliage growth, unauthorized night activity. The county clerk laughed when I asked if they were legit. None of that's enforceable, he said. I figured it would die down. It didn't. A week later, she showed up on an Advil out, orange, and absurd, rode it like she was training for a desert rally, and decided my private road was the perfect shortcut to the hiking trails beyond my land. The first time I flagged her down, she stopped, helmet under her arm, sunglasses perched like she was about to sell me a timeshare. I explained to Agana that the road was private. She smirked, revved the engine, and said, "Well, it looks public to me, maybe you should put up more signs." So I did. I added signs, 2 new locks, even installed a motion-activated gate arm, for 3 blissful days. Peace. Then I woke up to find the gate arm ripped off its post, tire tracks gouged into the soil. My sanctuary manager, Nena, stood beside me, arms crossed. She's treating this place like her personal dirt park. The final straw came when I found one of our young crocs, an injured one we just rescued, shivering near a torn section of fencing by the road. Karen's joyride had spooked it. The vibrations must have driven the poor thing into panic. That animal had already been through enough. I called her that night. Calm, firm. I told her I was pursuing legal recourse. She laughed. "It's just a road, Riley. You're being dramatic." 2 days later, a letter arrived. Official HOA letterhead claimed the road was a shared easement and thus subject to community access. Full of legal-sounding fluff. Zero authority. But one thing was clear: she wasn't backing down. That's when I stopped reacting and started planning. In a past life, I designed tactical zones and jungle containment barriers. I knew how to build deterrents that didn't look like deterrents. And I had the permits to build exactly what I needed. A wildlife water retention trench. A legal, ecologically beneficial projectile perfectly aligned with my sanctuary's mission. What Karen didn't know was that it would run directly across my road, just deep enough to stop unauthorized vehicles. While I mapped the trench, I also explored wildlife relocation options. The nearby conservation site was full of adult crocs. The stars aligned. A nearby conservation center needed to rehome a few crocs. I arranged for 2 of the calmest, healthiest ones to join my sanctuary as soon as the trench was complete. It would be a secure, monitored space, fresh water, shade, basking platforms, all within the boundaries of my land, under my control, and purely by coincidence directly in Karen's self-appointed path. Of course, it had to look legitimate. I filed the necessary environmental assessments, ensured fencing met code, and installed low-voltage perimeter markers disguised as decorative landscaping. To an untrained eye, it looked like a glorified koi pond, but this pond had teeth. Meanwhile, Karen kept testing boundaries. I caught her ATV tires inches from my trench stake HESA even with fresh signage posted. I overheard her boasting to guests that she was taming the wild man next door. I just smiled, because soon, she'd meet the wild ones. Then came the final trespass. The sun hadn't even fully cleared the trees when I heard the AMA engines. Karen and her entourage, 3 ATVs. Again, they ripped through the gate I had reinforced just the day before. The chain was cut cleanly. She didn't care anymore. The roar shook birds from the branches. I rushed outside, one boot half on, as my sanctuary staff scrambled to calm the animals. Karen didn't even glance around. She rolled through with mirrored sunglasses, that smug ho grin, and a folding chair dragging behind her ATV like a trophy. Then, just as fast as she came, she was gone, kicking up dust and laughter as she vanished into the woods. But what she didn't know, or what she couldn't have known, was that the trench was done. And in 72 hours, it wouldn't be just a trench. It would be a fully licensed, ecologically justified, crocodile habitat, monitored, legal, unavoidable. She had violated protected ground, endangered rescued animals, and laughed in the face of every warning. Now the terrain itself would answer, and the next time she tried to claim that road, she wouldn't find gravel, she'd find teeth. 3 days after her little parade, I stood at the edge of the road with a weathered tape measure, 2 orange flags, and a rolled-up blueprint under my arm. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about preservation, about control, about making damn sure my sanctuary and my life's work didn't become some thrill ride for a power-drunk co-tyrant. The gravel path, now scarred with ATV ruts, would no longer be a shortcut. It was about to become a boundary no one would dare cross. The trench needed to be precise. Too shallow, and it wouldn't stop anyone. Too wide, and it would raise questions. I marked 25 feet across the narrowest point of the road, just enough room to construct what I was now calling, on paper, at least, a water retention habitat. It sounded technical enough to discourage curiosity and gave me the space to build what I really needed, a natural-looking barrier that functioned like a medieval moat. I called an old military buddy turned environmental engineer and asked if he had a few days. He didn't even ask what it was for, just laughed and said, "On my way, bring boots and duct tape." While I waited for Cam, I filed every piece of paperwork I'd need. The county had a backlog, but I already held an active wildlife permit. I submitted plans for habitat expansion, citing water retention, erosion control, and native species support. I included photos of fencing, signage, and sanctuary infrastructure, just enough to look complete. What I didn't include was the hidden drop-in design for croc relocation, or the motion-triggered lights and remote camera network. I didn't have to, as long as it passed the safety checklist. The land was mine to use as I saw fit. Cam rolled up 2 days later in a dusty Jeep, cooler of beer in the back and a drone in the passenger seat. He stepped out, gave me a one-armed hug, and whistled low at the layout. Cam eyed the trench site, grinning as he stepped through the mud. "So this is Karen's conquest zone, huh? Looks like someone needs a lesson in trespassing." We got straight to work. The first phase was digging. We brought in a mini excavator under the guise of landscaping, carving out a basin at 10 feet wide, 6 feet deep. From the hose fence line, binoculars surely made it look like a simple drainage ditch. Perfect. Next, we lined the bottom with crushed rock and biodegradable mesh to create a natural filtration system. Then, pond soil layered on top. Cam flew the drone once a day to document progress. At night, we reviewed the footage, not just of the trench but of Karen herself. She made daily patrols, circling the property like some self-appointed sheriff in an old western. The road was still open for now, but not for long. One evening, she shouted across the fence, "Hope you're building a bridge, my ATV hates potholes." I smiled and waved. She had no idea what was coming. While construction continued, I contacted the wildlife transfer program I'd worked with before. They had 2 crocs ready to relocate, a calm adult male and a younger female, both displaced by overcrowding. Perfect candidates for my sanctuary's deeper waters and warm basking spots. The paperwork was nearly done. All I needed was a final inspection before delivery. Once the crocs arrived, the last piece of my plan would snap into place. On the 3rd night of digging, Cam and I kicked back by the fire, pita boots off, beers in hand, watching sensor lights blink along the property line. "You sure this'll work?" he asked. I nodded. Karen isn't scared of fences or paperwork, but she'll think twice when the land pushes back. She wants to play queen of the neighborhood. Let's give her a kingdom she can't rule. Cam raised his bottle to swamp justice. The next morning, fresh tire tracks caught my eye, not the usual ATV prints, but smaller ones, like a golf cart. I followed them cautiously and found a plastic HOA sign staked at the entrance to my private road. It read, "Temporary Community Trail Extension, HOA not liable for injuries." My blood boiled. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was a coordinated effort to claim my land under fake community rules. I snapped a photo, yanked the sign out, and threw it into my burn pile. Then I called my lawyer. Thankfully, my property rights were airtight. The deed was crystal clear, but the HOA was already spinning stories. Karen spread rumors I was a recluse hoarding dangerous animals and denying neighbors access to shared nature trails. One resident even messaged me on Facebook, asking if I was arming crocs for home defense. I ignored it, let them talk, because once the trench was finished and the crocs settled in, there'd be no more questions. The only choices: stay off the road, or meet nature's original boundary enforcers. By week's end, we'd installed the final touches: a low-voltage deterrent fence disguised as garden lighting, motion-activated sprinklers along the edges, and a camera system feeding straight to my phone. The trench filled naturally after rain, its filtered water giving it a peaceful, deceptive calm. Cam even added water plants and floating logs to sell the illusion. Beneath the serene surface, the sanctuary was fully operational, a perfect mix of beauty and warning. The last piece was timing. I coordinated with the relocation team to bring the crocs just before dawn when traffic was low and the HOA was still groggy. They arrived in a reinforced truck, crates marked and sealed. We unloaded the crocs carefully, guiding them with long poles in channels. The animals slipped into the water with barely a ripple, circled once, then settled near the edge to sunbathe. Perfect, legal, completely out of Karen's control. By noon, everything was in place. Sensors live, warning signs up, the trench a convincing pond, and the crocs motionless statues of power. The road looked peaceful, until the next intrusion. I knew it was coming. Less than 24 hours later, the morning silence shattered with the roar of Karen's ATV. My phone buzzed. Emotion detected. Road camera 1. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, until there she was, a full throttle, sunglasses on, hair whipping wild in the wind, heading straight for the trench. Clueless, I stood on my porch, arms crossed, waiting. This time I didn't need to chase her. I didn't need to argue. I just needed to watch. She was about to learn a lesson no home manual could teach. You can bully people, you can lie on paper, but you can't argue with a crocodile. Karen's ATV tore down the gravel road again, louder than ever, the engine's roar echoing through the trees like a ridiculous war cry. I stood perfectly still on the porch, phone in hand, watching the live feed. I didn't even need to step off the deck. The motion sensors were perfectly positioned, feeding a full 368 degrees view of the trench zone straight to my phone. There she was, revving and bouncing over the gravel like some wild pioneer. But this wasn't the frontier anymore. This was my turf and the croc's turf. Karen wasn't alone. Behind her, 2 more familiar faces: Bill, the constant complainer about too much tree shade, and Brenda, who once asked why my sanctuary didn't have cute bunnies instead of those ugly lizard things. All 3 were grinning, laughing, clearly expecting another unauthorized safari through my land. But this ride wasn't ending the way they hoped. Karen led the pack, leaning forward with the same reckless confidence, completely oblivious to what awaited her on the trail she'd stolen. I watched her approach the trench, which from a distance looked calm and shallow. The crocs were sunbathing near the middle, half submerged, perfectly still. The water reflected the sky like glass, deepening the illusion of peace. But I knew that the moment those ATVs crossed the edge, everything would change. Karen didn't slow down, and not even when she passed 3 new signs posted clearly: active wildlife area and no unauthorized access, a dangerous animals present. In fact, she sped up. Her ATV bounced on the gravel, kicked up a cloud of dust, and launched toward the pit's edge. She hit the brakes too late. Her front wheels touched the muddy slope, skidded hard, and sent the ATV sliding sideways. Karen screamed, the sound echoing as the vehicle tilted, spun, and finally came to rest sideways, just feet from the water. Bill and Brenda stopped in time, both yanking their handlebars to avoid following her in. Karen stumbled off, one boot sinking into mud, the other trapped in the seat. She fell back with a grunt, arms flailing, her sunglasses flying into the water. The crocs moved. I had timed their feeding and activity perfectly to avoid aggression, but they were territorial creatures. One slid across the water with slow, deliberate grace. Karen, stunned, scrambled to her feet, dirt-covered, struggling to free her boot from the ATV. It wasn't until she heard the soft splash and saw reptilian eyes fixed on her just 10 feet away that she froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then the second croc surfaced closer, this time a jaw closed, drifting silently, watching from the far bank. Bill shouted, "Karen, don't move." But his voice cracked in panic. Brenda was already backing her ATV away, wide-eyed and shaking. Karen finally gathered herself and backed away slowly from the water, trembling, clutching her now muddy phone in one hand. Then, exactly on cue, the motion-triggered sprinklers activated a set low along the trench's edge, meant to startle, not soak. A sudden spray arced over Karen, drenching her and the ATV. The crocs didn't flinch, but Karen did. She screamed, bolted up the slope, slipped, fell forward, then clawed her way up like a contestant in some chaotic obstacle course. When she finally reached level ground, she looked like a swamp creature herself, in mud, panic, and humiliation tangled together beneath designer clothes and HOA arrogance. I couldn't help myself. I stepped off the porch and walked slowly down the gravel path, boots crunching softly. By the time Karen saw me, she was already on her feet, trying desperately to salvage whatever dignity she had left. "What the want me to keep going? What the hell is this?" Karen yelled, her voice cracking. "You could have killed me." I stopped about 10 feet away, folding my arms. "It's a legally permitted conservation trench with protected species," I said calmly. "The signs were posted. This road is private. You're trespassing." Her face twisted with disbelief. "There are crocodiles in a road? That's outrageous." I nodded toward the deed marker. "It's not a road, it's a wildlife sanctuary extension on private land, a land you and your ATV are currently violating." Bill and Brenda stayed silent, both too pale to back her up. Karen looked around, searching for support, but none came. She glanced back at the trench, now calm with the crocs retreating to deeper water. "I'm going to the police," she finally said, her voice trembling more with embarrassment than fear. "Great," I replied. "Make sure to bring this footage too." I held up my phone and played a clip of her ATV ramming through the gate, tearing down the path, and crashing near the trench. Her eyes widened as the footage played. "That's illegal surveillance." She spat. "It's security footage," I said. "Shared with the Wildlife Division per my license. Everything you've done is on record. So is the habitat." Karen's face flushed bright red, her hair plastered to her forehead. She stormed back to her ATV, which now refused to start. The engine coughed and died. Brenda reluctantly helped her climb onto the back of her cart while Bill pushed the dead ATV aside. They rode off in silence, covered in mud and shame. That night, I uploaded the footage to the private conservation Facebook group I co-managed, expecting maybe a few laughs. Instead, it exploded. By morning, the clip had gone viral, millions of views, comments flooding in from across the country. News outlets picked it up. One headline read, "Ho Queen meets her match in nature's real landlords." Another, "Woman tries to steal road, gets humbled by reptiles." I never even posted it to Reddit, someone else did. The post shot to the top with captions like, "Karen forgot crocs are HOA exempt." The flood of attention brought more than laughs. A local wildlife official publicly praised the sanctuary project as a model for passive ecological protection, noting the clear signage and safety measures I'd put in place. The HOA tried to respond with a formal complaint, but the county shut it down quickly. In fact, they launched an inquiry into the HOA leadership and their history of overreach. Karen's position was suspended pending review. Neighbors who once stayed quiet began speaking out. One sent me a simple message: "About time someone put her in her place." Others volunteered to help plant trees along the trench. Even kids from the neighborhood came with their parents to learn about the crocodile, this time safely behind the observation fence. The road was no longer a battleground. It had become something more powerful, a reminder that not everything in life can be bulldozed by arrogance and a loud engine. Karen kept a low profile. For the first time since she'd arrived, her ATV sat untouched in her driveway. When she walked past my property, she kept her head down and her steps quick. As for me, I returned to my work. The crocs thrived. The sanctuary was peaceful once again. The trench had done its job. No more HOA nonsense, just calm water, sharp teeth, and a lesson no one in the neighborhood would forget. The calm didn't last long. For a brief, beautiful week, Karen vanished from my daily routine. No roaring engines, no HOA letters, no midnight gate rattling. Even the crocs seemed more relaxed, drifting lazily in the sun, taking to their new trench as if they'd been there forever. I thought maybe, just maybe, the message had finally sunk in. But that's not how people like Karen operate. She didn't disappear because she'd accepted reality. She was regrouping, and I didn't know it yet. But she was about to try something even more reckless, something that would escalate everything beyond what I was prepared for. It started with a rumor. Nana, my sanctuary manager, came into the office looking unsettled. A friend from the HOA gardening committee mentioned Karen is hosting a private meeting at her house. Nana said. The topic: strategies for reclaiming community easements. That alone didn't worry me too much. Karen loved her fantasy legal battles, and I'd already proven my ownership countless times. But then Nana added, Karen had recently been seen walking the property line at night, clipboard in hand. Nana told me Karen had been seen measuring something along the fence line at night, flashlight in hand, muttering about circumventing the trench. That very night, at 2:38 a.m., the sensors on the western fence went off. I checked the camera feed and saw a figure in a hood moving stealthily along the fence, ducking low and fiddling with one of the posts. I couldn't make out the face clearly, but I didn't need to. The stance, the build, the way she moved it like she owned every inch of that land. There was no doubt, Karen wasn't giving up. She was planning something, and whatever it was, it wasn't going to be legal or smart. I reinforced the sensors, added 2 more solar-powered lights, and rigged a secondary motion-triggered camera angled low to catch any foot traffic. But I wasn't ready for what came next. 2 nights later, just after midnight, the alarm blared louder than ever. I pulled up the live feed and blinked in disbelief. Karen wasn't just sneaking around this time, she was inside the fence. She'd cut the zip ties off one of the side gates, probably thinking she'd found a secret entrance. And she wasn't alone. 2 men, one wearing a baseball cap, the other dragging what looked like bolt cutters, were helping her carry gear, a ladder, a roll of plastic sheeting. It took me a few seconds to realize what they were trying to do. They were building a temporary bridge across the trench. Karen had come back with a plan to bypass the crocodile moat, and she'd brought backup. I grabbed my phone and hit the emergency call button for the county sheriff. While waiting for the response, I flipped through the camera feed. Karen and her 2 helpers were halfway through setting up what looked like plywood boards, with ropes tied on either side, as if they planned to pull it across like some kind of swing bridge. It would have been comical if it weren't happening live, on my protected land. Then, one of the crocs surfaced. The bigger male eased out of the water like a ghost, silent, steady. He hovered right under the shadow of the half-built bridge, just watching. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy yelling at one of the men for dropping a plank. The whole scene looked like a high school theater production of a failed escape mission. Before I could decide whether to confront them or just wait for the deputies, the sensor lights popped on, bright, Blinding lights flooded the entire trench zone like a stadium. The croc didn't flinch. Karen did. She gasped, shielded her face, then looked down, finally seeing those reptilian eyes staring back just feet away. One of the men froze. The other took off running toward the gate. Karen screamed, "Get back here, it's just a lizard." The second man didn't stop. He disappeared into the trees, crashing through underbrush like a deer on fire. The man still with Karen slowly backed away, hands raised, breathing hard. "Karen," he said, "we need to leave right now." Karen stood her ground, clutching a piece of plywood like it was a shield. "He can't do this," she snapped. "He can't put crocodiles in the road. I'll sue him into next week." Just then, the first red and blue flashes lit up the trees. The deputies had arrived. Their truck pulled up just behind the sanctuary entrance, and within minutes, 3 officers jogged down the path, with flashlights raised, guns holstered but clearly ready. One called out, "Hands where we can see them." Karen dropped the plywood like it was on fire and raised her hand. The man beside her did the same, though his legs looked ready to give out. The croc stayed put and unbothered like a king watching fools stumble in his court. The officers separated the group, took statements, and asked me to walk them through the footage. I did it gladly. Every minute of the trespass was recorded in crystal clarity, from cutting the gate, to the trench crossing attempt, to the moment Karen laid eyes on the crocodile. One officer turned to me and said, "This isn't just trespassing. She tampered with your conservation site. That's a big deal." Karen exploded. "It's not a conservation site. It's a crocodile trap. He's weaponizing animals." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "You walked onto his land at night with tools, trying to build a bridge over a clearly posted protected area. That's not a good look," the deputy said, shaking his head. Karen was arrested on the spot for criminal trespass, attempted vandalism of an ecological site, and reckless endangerment. The man with her got off with a warning but looked so shaken I doubted he'd ever set foot in hoe business again. Her original partner in crime was caught the next day, identified from the footage. He claimed he thought they were setting up a nature viewing platform. No one bought it. The fallout was swift. Within a week, the HOA held an emergency board meeting, and members unanimously voted to remove Karen from her position. She didn't even attend. Word spread fast about the incident, the arrest, and the now viral footage titled "HOA Karen Tries to Cross Crocodile Pit, Gets Bitten by the Law." News outlets picked it up. Late-night hosts made jokes. Someone even remixed her scream into a dance track that played non-stop on social media for days. For the first time in years, the HOA was quiet. Actually quiet. No one complained about frogs. No one sent me notices about tree heights or mailbox colors. In fact, one neighbor dropped off a thank you card and a basket of cookies that said, "For defending nature and our sanity." As for the trench, it became something of a local attraction. I added a small fenced-off viewing area where people could learn about crocodile behavior and conservation. School kids came on field trips. Environmental science students asked to do internships. My sanctuary gained exposure, grants, and even a small donation from a celebrity animal rights group that had seen the viral video. Karen eventually moved out. She packed her things in the dead of night, left her lawn untrimmed, and put her house on the market. The listing read, "Price to move." A small note in the neighborhood description said, "Adjacent to peaceful wildlife preserve." I guess even realtors couldn't resist the irony. Sometimes I wonder what she thinks when she looks back on all these, whether she thinks I won, or if she still sees herself as a victim of some conspiracy involving reptiles and zoning laws. Honestly, I don't care. Now, when I walk that road, it's quiet, safe, and respected. The crocs glide beneath the water, the trees sway gently in the wind. No one dares trespass, not out of fear, but because they understand that this land isn't just mine, it's theirs too. It took a wild, muddy, ridiculous battle to remind everyone of that simple truth. The weeks following Karen's downfall felt like a season change, and not just in the weather, but in the whole neighborhood atmosphere. Where there had once been tension, suspicion, and the distant roar of ATV engines, there was now something almost unheard of here: respectful silence. No one tested property lines. No one questioned the sanctuary signs. Most importantly, no one came barreling down my private road like they were auditioning for a monster truck rally. The road became what it was always meant to be, an access point for conservation and peace, and not ego and entitlement. It was strange, but in the best way possible. The crocodiles settled into their new habitat with the kind of contentment only ancient creatures can muster. They moved with lazy confidence, claiming their space and defending it without a growl. Nature had restored its own balance in a way no court case or home meeting ever could. I continued to monitor them daily, checking cameras, adjusting thermal sensors, maintaining the electric fence. What started as a defensive measure evolved into a model ecosystem. I was proud, and not just because it worked, but because it told a story about boundaries, consequences, and the power of letting nature speak for itself. But peace never lasts forever, not because someone tried to trespass again, but because people started to take notice for entirely different reasons. Local news stations had already done their feel-good segments, but when a popular national wildlife magazine published a cover story titled "The Man Who Built a Crocodile Moat to Stop the HOA," the floodgates opened. Suddenly, I was getting emails from documentary filmmakers, nature influencers, and college professors asking if they could bring students to study the trench ecosystem. A producer from a streaming platform wanted to license the footage for a reality series about conflicts between suburban development and wildlife preservation. What surprised me most wasn't the attention, but how quickly the narrative shifted. I wasn't just the guy with the crocs anymore. I was being called an environmental innovator, a symbol of how to defend natural spaces from encroachment. One journalist even compared my trench to an ecological Berlin Wall, which was dramatic, but the point stood. The trench had done more than just stop an ATV. It had redrawn the line between reckless expansion and rightful preservation. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. The HOA, now under new leadership, tried to quietly distance itself from the whole incident. They sent out a carefully worded newsletter, saying they'd refined their policies around shared paths and private access, and were committed to fostering respectful relationships with neighboring properties. It was the most passive-aggressive apology I'd ever read. But I didn't need a real apology. I had something better: complete, unquestioned control over my land, backed by public support, legal confirmation, and 2 very relaxed reptiles sunbathing in plain view. Then came the letter from Karen's attorney, neatly typed, full of legal jargon and puff-toop demands. They claimed emotional distress, reputational damage, even post-traumatic anxiety triggered by wildlife. They threatened to sue me for creating an environment designed to embarrass and endanger her. I read it twice, just to make sure it wasn't satire. It wasn't. She was actually arguing that my legally permitted crocodile sanctuary on my own land was a targeted act of harassment. My lawyer laughed so hard on the phone, he had to mute himself. Of course, we responded formally attaching every permit, footage timestamp, county approval, and public safety assessment. We included a detailed statement from the Wildlife Agency confirming all regulations were followed and that the crocodiles were not aggressive unless provoked. Then we added a final blow, a signed witness statement from one of Karen's own home members who admitted Karen had bragged about teaching the croc guy a lesson and taking the road back by force. The case never made it to court. Her lawyer quietly withdrew within a month. Around that time, I noticed something new in my neighbor's face, as in not fear, not annoyance, but curiosity. More than a few stopped by, lingering near the observation fence, asking cautious questions. What do the crocs eat? How do you care for them? Can they recognize you? One Saturday, I set up a small educational display at the edge of the property, just a folding table, a few pamphlets, and a speaker playing audio about conservation efforts. I called it Croc Talk. By the 3rd weekend, it had turned into a full event. Kids showed up with sketchbooks. Local teachers asked if I could speak at the elementary school. Someone even brought croc-themed cupcakes. The community that once saw me as a hermit obsessed with reptiles was now seeing the bigger picture. The trench wasn't just a deterrent anymore, it was a symbol of coexistence. Proof that humans and nature don't have to clash if we learn to respect each other's space. And in that transformation, something even more surprising happened. I made friends, real friends. Neighbors who once whispered about me at home meetings were now stopping by to ask if I needed help repairing the gate or wanted to join them for a backyard cookout. One even brought me a welcome sign shaped like a crocodile, grinning, with the words, "No trespassing unless you can swim." Cam, my old buddy who helped me dig the trench, came back for a visit and was stunned by the change. We sat by the water's edge, watching the crocs float lazily under the late afternoon sun. He raised a beer and said, "You didn't just fix a road problem, you rewired the whole neighborhood." I nodded, not because I had planned it, but because it had happened all the same. As for Karen, no one really knew where she went. Some said she moved 2 towns over. Others claimed she took a job in another state. A few rumors even said she was spotted in a therapy group for people traumatized by reptiles. Whether any of it was true didn't matter. Her reign was over, and in its place stood something sturdier than rules or power: consequences. The land had spoken, and it didn't need a gavel or a megaphone to be heard. One evening, I stood at the trench's edge, watching the last light dip behind the trees. The air was still, filled only with soft frog croaks, water ripples, and the quiet breathing of 2 crocodiles who had no idea they'd become local celebrities. I thought back to the day I first saw Karen tearing through my road, at the sound of her ATV bouncing off the trees like an insult to everything I'd built. That moment felt so far away now, like a different world, because this one, the one I stood in now, was stronger, wiser, rooted. Not every problem needs a war to fix. Sometimes it just needs a good plan, a bit of patience, and a pair of ancient guardians with sharp teeth and zero tolerance for nonsense. I didn't win because I fought louder. I won because I let the land speak for itself. And when it did, it roared, and not with violence, but with truth, clarity, and nature reclaiming its space. And just like that, the road that once led to chaos now led to calm. Not a moat, not a battleground, but a boundary,